645 times. That's the number of times I could have critically injured you, and also the number of times I've decided against doing so. I could eliminate you in 2 seconds. Your eyes are the eyes of the dead. The dead cannot stop me. Long before Jujutsu Kaisen Sukuna, and long after Hunter x Hunter's Meruem, Tokyo Ghoul would introduce us to one of, if not the greatest depiction of the strongest, Arima Kisho. In this video, I intend to explain and provide a bit of analysis behind what allowed Arima to be what I believe is the greatest depiction of the strongest in manga, and why his strength was just different from most who were declared to be the strongest in their respective series. Unlike most, Arima Kisho did not bring excitement or hope to the story with any appearances that he would make, but quite the contrary. Arima would usually be accompanied by the feeling of fear and desperation. With that said, I'll wrap up the intro here. If you enjoy content such as this, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And now, let's get into it. Before we get into Tokyo Ghoul Re, where we actually learn about Arima, who he is, what he stands for, things of that nature, I believe the most fundamental part of Arima's portrayal of the strongest comes from his first true introduction to the story as an antagonist to Kaneki, which is the very abrupt end of Tokyo Ghoul. As Kaneki runs through the Antiku raid, saving almost everybody partaking in it, he runs into both Enji and Irimi, who are also powerful combatants on his side, and they all create the plan to eventually meet back up at an underground area called V14. On his way there, Kaneki confronts Amon one last time, barely managing to defeat him. As Kaneki desperately crawls to the meeting point as he's losing his sanity, he comes across Hide one last time, who may have sacrificed himself in order to give Kaneki a chance against this unknown obstacle in his way. Here is where the story cuts away from Kaneki's mental breakdown, and when we come back to Kaneki, he explains that Hide was now gone, and he was now completely healed up and alone, with nothing but the taste of sweet blood in his mouth. He would continue to walk aimlessly until reaching a clearing, a field of decaying flowers with a man silently standing in the midst of it all, like a puzzle piecing itself together. Kaneki instantly understood the situation and knew who this man was. Arima Kisho, the undefeated investigator of the CCG who had been silently waiting for him this entire time. As Kaneki stares at Arima, he says that the sight was strangely beautiful, and goes on to reveal that the decaying flower bed that Arima had been standing in this entire time was truly a field of dead bodies. Kaneki sees what's happened to his comrades and attempts to push himself into this fight with anger, but he couldn't do anything but feel immense despair. He knew the truth. He knew that no matter what he did, he was going to end up another body in this field. Understand that at this point, Kaneki was one of the more powerful characters in the series that we knew of at the time. He wasn't top 3 or anything, but he was at least top 10, bare minimum. So for him to say something like this was an insane shock to the reader, because Kaneki had always been a character who would always beat the odds, and when he lost, he would really only lose to himself. As Kaneki goes in to strike Arima, he's impaled before he's able to even take a step, and right after, Arima puts another blade through his eye. And from there on, the fight is a one-sided massacre, ending with what seems to be Arima eliminating Kaneki and going about his day. And he goes on to fight the strongest ghoul in the series, who is wiping out multiple special class investigators with their eyes closed, the One-Eyed Owl. And this fight ends with him scaring her off, and he didn't even put in any effort. To me, and many others, seeing a protagonist get eradicated the way Kaneki did and brushed off to the side like that was insane. After everything we've been through in the story, just for Kaneki to run into the wrong person and die shortly after was something that left PTSD in all of the readers. So shortly after Arima takes over this entire final arc, he completely ends it in 4 chapters, and the first half of Tokyo Ghoul ends as a whole. Fast forward 2 months in the real world, and the sequel to Tokyo Ghoul Re, was finally released. Yes, Sui Yoshida would only do a 2-month break before starting the sequel, which is insane, but I digress. Here, we will be introduced to Heisei Sasaki, who was very reminiscent of Kaneki, but people didn't want to say they were the same person just yet, and it was really because it was so obvious that we just thought it had to be a red herring. It'd be shown in the very first chapter that Heisei was being cultivated with the intention of surpassing Arima himself, and that they apparently already had a great mentor-mentee relationship, which is a scary bombshell for us to be hit with as soon as Ri would begin. And furthermore, after Heisei would lash out in his ghoul state in chapter 7, Arima would be shown in the very next chapter simply saying that Heisei did what he had to do and that's all there was to it, while telling him that he needed to expand his limits, which was great foreshadowing for something in the future. Also, there's just small hints to Arima's character being a bit more than how we'd be introduced to him, as after he and Heisei sparred in the meeting room, they both agreed to keep it a secret from everyone else as if it were a joke. Not only this, Arima does seem genuinely moved when Heisei says that Arima is his father and that he'd bring his own children to see him. And Arima even responds by saying that he'd like to see his own grandchildren someday. Arima's portrayal at the beginning of Ri is completely different from how we'd originally see him as this unstoppable killing machine, and despite this, I did not let my guard down. You never really could after the initial display he showed, but there was some semblance of humanity shown in Arima here, although the story will endlessly imply otherwise. Arima doesn't really appear much until many chapters down the line, but he does make an appearance at the end of the auction in chapter 31, where he was apparently going to eliminate Hinami, but Heisei would intercept this by claiming ownership over her, and in flashbacks during the Rosewald raid about 20 chapters later, detailing his borderline abusive training regimen for Heisei before the series began, as he asked Heisei if he would like to die again if he can't continue. I think how people would see Arima after learning of how he treated Heisei before the events of Ri may vary from person to person, but for me personally, I was still on the fence like I had been the entire story. Despite how I felt, this moment reminded me of the fear that I had of Arima, despite being on the fence of his morality, because no matter how you spin it, Arima could end the series again if he ever felt like doing so. See, something I've always enjoyed about Arima being the character who represents the strongest is the fact that to him, being the strongest isn't his main selling point. Not only that, it's only a part of his character. Arima's role as the strongest serves to only assist his role as a Reaper and a haunting figure over the story of Tokyo Ghoul, yet he does such a great job at displaying overwhelming strength that you can't help but notice it. It's like he's not even trying to play this role. After this traumatic flashback, Heisei would soon regain his memories and become kaneki once more, going on to defeat both Kane and Eto and closing out the entire arc as a whole by eating Eto's Kakuja, giving himself a massive power up as a reward. This is an important detail, as at this point we knew Kaneki vs Arima was going to happen again, it was just a matter of when. So maybe Eto leaving Kaneki this Kakuja for him to eat would actually give him a chance at winning. Soon after, Arima goes on to easily defeat Shachi, despite him noticing Arima's glaucoma and him being one of the strongest ghouls in the series easily. It takes Arima less than half a chapter to wipe Shachi off the earth, something we've seen Kaneki in the previous series make absolutely zero progress in doing, despite using multiple strategies against Shachi and being given multiple chances to do so. As this moment would take place before the two Reapers would finally clash once more, this seemed to serve as build up to Arima. Keep in mind that at this point, we hadn't seen Arima fight since he destroyed both Kaneki and Eto in sequence, so I do believe this moment was to remind us of Arima's strength and let us know that he has certainly not lost his touch. As this essay kind of focuses on the nuances of Arima's strength rather than his raw strength, I do want to hammer down the point that when Arima was spoken about in the series, like his stories, his lore, his fights, or whenever we'd actually see him in a fight, all the characters do not fight Arima with the intention of overcoming and defeating him. The true challenge in fighting Arima was finding an escape route. You fought Arima to run away and hope and pray that you can find a way out of the situation. He's like one of those red named characters in a video game. When he pulled up, you had to run and hope he left the map. Arima was just that powerful. Now before we get into the eventual battle between Kaneki and Arima, the arc that contains their battle begins with Kaneki looking at his old cell in Kokle and entering a brief flashback of Kaneki and Arima formally meeting after Arima would destroy him at the end of the original series. To keep this flashback short, Arima displays that he is quite a cruel person, but that he's more empathetic than we may believe. There's always a method to his madness. This is Ishida doing a perfect job at keeping you endlessly guessing when it comes to Arima, the person he is, and his true intentions. It's almost as if Ishida wants you to let your guard down next to this calamity, meanwhile telling you to always look over your shoulder because one wrong move and you're done. The story reinforces this feeling by having Kaneki himself feel the exact same and expressing that in his thoughts constantly. Ghoul uses Arima's role as the strongest to not be displayed in battles or as someone who needs to be defeated as a milestone, but the story chooses to use this role to send shivers down its reader's spine and to endlessly screw with them, and I love it. Even when we finally come to Arima and Kaneki's confrontation that's been built up little by little throughout the story, the first thing that Kaneki thinks of is if his father sees him, hoping that Arima puts the blade down and shows any signs of empathy or love toward Kaneki by letting him go, despite deep down already accepting that he sacrificed his life for the sake of the people that he loves. Even with this resolve, Kaneki's forced to ponder if he was ever truly loved. To him, it's the only chance that he has of walking away with his life, and also Arima's. Not only this, he doesn't even want to fight Arima because he does love him with all his heart as well. As the two battle, Arima easily cuts off both of Kaneki's legs and tells him to stop screwing around, and the scene right after displays him from many years ago crushing a butterfly with no apparent reason, and as Tsuneyoshi asks Arima what's bothering him, he would say an insect, and we'd cut back to the present with Kaneki on the floor. Meanwhile, Arima's back is facing him. A clear metaphor. To us, this would be confirmation of the heart that Arima possesses. The question that's haunted all readers throughout the entire run would finally be answered here. Arima is not our friend, and Kaneki has no choice but to somehow overcome this or die again. Nothing else. And it doesn't help that we're shown that every character in the story could not or never understand Arima right after. It's a heartbreaking and horrifying moment, and really a smack of reality to the reader's face, telling us, hey, you thought you were different from the rest, but that was never the case. Instead, you misunderstood him like everybody else, and now you'll pay the price for making that mistake. Ghoul is always a psychological thriller before anything else, and Ishida always makes sure to stick to that before anything else. As we come back to the fight, Kaneki lies on the ground as a mess and attempts to desperately crawl away. Arima goes on to let him know that he's had 645 chances to end the battle. In 645 chances, he decided to spare Kaneki's life, and he could end this in 2 seconds if he chose to. Kaneki, despite all of his growth, is still no more than an ant to him, and if he can't stop him here, he's gonna go down and slaughter every single one of his friends with no hesitation, after finishing off Kaneki, of course. Kaneki doesn't make it clear that he's going to defeat Arima himself, so Arima calls him a waste and flexes on him by attempting to kill him the same way that he's once killed him before, forcing Kaneki to go into a berserk Kakuja state. And then, the true fight begins. Nope. Arima absolutely decimates Kaneki again. Not even a Kakuja power-up could close the gap between the two. It's not until Kaneki gets a pep talk from his best friend in his own mentally shattered brain where he stands back up and faces Arima not with a look of grimace, but a smile. A smile that communicates to Arima that Kaneki isn't facing him to sacrifice himself, but here, he's going to face him to win and live on. And this is what makes Arima finally throw away that mask and smile for once in the fight. It's at this moment that once Kaneki has truly learned to value his own life and fight for it, Arima smiles, and he drops the facade of the ruthless monster. Soon after this, Arima throws the fight and fatally wounds himself. This makes Kaneki run toward him and ask him what he's doing and why would he do this, and he tells Kaneki to be quiet and listen, as he goes on to reveal his heritage, why he's as strong as he is, and a hint toward his true intentions of Kaneki, asking him to become the man who defeated Arima Kisho, and begging him to become that person so Kaneki can begin making steps toward mending the Ghoul in human societies. And once Kaneki accepts, he thanks him from the bottom of his heart for allowing him to finally do something that is not taking the lives of others, but quite the contrary, someone who was finally able to leave something behind on this world. And we're shown that Arima had never crushed that butterfly from earlier in the first place, but instead, he let it go when nobody was watching, showing that deep down inside, he's never wanted the life of taking others' lives, and the one who sought death more than anyone was the Reaper himself. Being the strongest to Arima was something that never really pleased him, and in fact, forced him into a role that made him completely miserable his entire life, but it also gave him the opportunity to change the entire world and leave something behind if he were to endure the role long enough. In a way, Arima's journey can also serve as a metaphor for someone pursuing their purpose, as he did endure a long, miserable life that paid out in him having a successor who would go on to save the entire world and Ghoul kind, ensuring that an existence such as his would never exist again. To me, Arima Kisho was an extremely unique case of a character who played the role of the strongest, as again, he didn't use this role in the same manner that pretty much every other character does, and used it as a foundation to a greater cause. Even in a meta context, Arima's role as the strongest was used in two unique ways. One, to instill fear into readers, as if he were playing the role of an apex predator that none can reason with up until the very end, and two, to achieve something greater than himself. Being the strongest was no more than a means to an end, and overall, this is how I see his character, and I absolutely think he was the best character of his time when it comes to being the strongest. With that said, I heavily recommend everybody to give Tokyo Ghoul a read or a reread, as it's been many years since it's concluded, and I think you might like it on another run. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.